Hello, welcome to Herp Corner. Here we are in the Danam Valley rainforest in Sabah, Malaysia, where we'll be discussing the cat gecko, also known as Aeluroscalabotes felinus, or, in German, Husbandry Gecko. They grow up to around 7 inches, or 18 centimeters, depending on the sex, with an average lifespan of 11 years. They have maroon-colored bodies with bright white spots along their tails and a white underbelly. Their heads are very sharp, and they've got spindly little legs and weirdly long bodies. Some subspecies have a bright white stripe down their backs. There's overall a lot of variability within this species. You can tell this by looking at the shape of their pupils, but these guys are nocturnal. Nocturnal reptiles typically have pupils in the shape of slits, since it makes their eyes more sensitive to light, therein making it easier to see in the dark. Cat geckos get their namesake from a few characteristics of their physical appearance. First off, they have retractable claws, similarly to cats, making climbing much easier. Second off, their tails are able to curl into a spiral, kind of similarly to cats. This amount of tail prehensibility is almost unheard of in geckos, more comparable to a chameleon, if anything. Prehensibility is the ability of an appendage to grasp. This isn't well documented, but I think this species possesses the ability to drop their tails. Basing this solely on the family they're a part of, Eublephaриdae, which includes leopard geckos and cave geckos, both of which drop their tails when put under stress. Also, here is this photo that I found of a cat gecko that has already dropped its tail. At least I think so, but that's what that looks like. So I think that is extra evidence to support the fact that cat geckos do in fact drop their tails. Anyway, speaking of their family, Eublephaриdae is a species of eyelid geckos, which is admittedly a kind of weird term, but it means that they are some of the few gecko species that actually have movable eyelids. Guys like crested geckos do have eyelids, but they're stuck closed and see-through. With cat geckos, they can close and open their eyes right in front of you. Very cool. When sleeping, they'll curl up like a common house cat. Another unique characteristic is their very slender anatomy. They're slim, again like most cats, and move very slowly and deliberately. In general, they're an incredibly inquisitive species. Here's the fun fact about geckos in general. You know the little pouch underneath geckos' jaws that expands as they breathe? That process is a crucial part of their normal respiration, and helps them smell larger quantities of air for detecting potential predators or prey. Their throat pouches bulge when they eat and expands and contrasts faster when the gecko is stressed or excited. In the wild, the cat gecko is very elusive, camouflaging easily. Their main defense mechanism is freezing in place when in the presence of danger, often making them hard to spot. They're native to the lowland and hill dipterocarp forests of Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Cambodia, and Thailand. They were discovered in 1864 by Albert Karl Ludwig Gotthilf Gunther, a German-British zoologist. Cat geckos, although technically arboreal, aren't typically found super high in the trees. Usually they're only a couple meters off the ground and near some sort of water source. Locating them in the wild is the easiest in September and October, since that's when a majority of their babies are born. The IUCN Red List currently considers this species as least concern. Very exciting. However, they are occasionally threatened by logging, but at the same time, those instances are incredibly localized. Additionally, cat geckos are sometimes victims of exporting for the pet trade. If you ever go to a reptile show and see this species, there's a high likelihood that they're wild caught. The husbandry of cat geckos is moderately difficult, moderately to extremely, mostly for how delicate these guys are. They're not as sensitive as, say, a chameleon, but it's good to be very, very careful with them, especially with handling. Actually, this would work better as a display species than as one you regularly handle. They're not normally aggressive or anything, but they get stressed easily, and if they fall, not to get morbid, but it could be pretty bad for them. Other than that, the care is kind of similar to a crested gecko. Humidity and verticality are the biggest concerns. The minimum enclosure would be a 12-inch vertical exoterra. Since they don't care at all about burrowing, there's no need for loose substrate. Therein, no need for a bioactive setup. The bottom should be a repticarpet with more of an emphasis towards decor. Some plastic leaves, vines, twigs, and hides work fine. Feeding for them is also interesting. From what I've heard, they're a carnivorous species. Feeding for juveniles can be once every other day, where they should be fed around 3 prey items. For adults, it should take place 3 times a week. with up to 6 prey items. And don't feed them too much or too often, because that will piss him off and stress him out. But don't feed them too little or too infrequently, because they don't like that either. Also, since they've gotta be live animals you feed to them, most ideally crickets, hornworms, waxworms, dubia roaches, all those, don't forget to not leave them in the enclosure. You can either try dangling them in front of the gecko with some tweezers, or set them down in front of him. With either, if the cat gecko shows a lack of interest for 5 minutes straight, take out the prey. Also, make sure that whatever you feed them is calcium dusted, Repticalcium D3 and all that. At minimum, once a day you should mist the enclosure to keep the humidity up. Here in Malaysia, the average is around 75%. To keep this up, the best course of action is usually consistent misting. Something that usually adds to the enclosure's humidity is a water bowl. Unlike with most other semi-arboreal species, I'd actually recommend providing some sort of water bowl. In the wild, crested geckos specifically usually drink off of leaves. That's why people don't give them water bowls in enclosures, since they lick water droplets off of freshly misted glass instead. These guys, however, in the wild, always hang out near some sort of water source. A riverbed, a creek, you get it. The water you use for both the misting and the actual water bowl should be dechlorinated, preferably with the help of Zoomed Reptisafe Instant Terrarium Water Conditioner. I've got my own bottle personally, and I'm a big fan. Hey Zoomed, I love your water conditioner. How about a sponsorship? Anyway, lighting is also not something you have to keep in mind. I mean, heating in general isn't really necessary. These guys like it more on the cooler side, they're nocturnal, and with that, you can provide a heat pad if your house gets, during the day, lower than 80 degrees Fahrenheit, or 26 degrees Celsius, and during the night, it gets lower than 60 degrees Fahrenheit, or 15 degrees Celsius. This is yet another species where I really wouldn't recommend them to anyone who isn't already a reptile breeder. There are just so little people breeding cat geckos, mostly because of, well, even just taking care of these guys is hard. They have very specific taste, and if you don't cater to it, they will get stressed out very easily. With that, only attempt pairing up a male and a female if you've really gotten their care down. Breeding can be a serious stressor for them, since, you know, population isn't exactly fun for most animals. These guys are sexually dimorphic. The females are an inch or two bigger than the males, the females usually growing up to 8 inches. Not only that, but for this species' family in general, you can tell the males apart from the females through the Hemi Penal bulge, which sounds pretty gross, and it kind of is, but it's effectively when a male has a bit of a bulge under his cloaca. Females of this species don't have a hemipenal bulge, which makes it easier to sex them. There is no known morph trade for cat geckos, but there are multiple unique subspecies. Though, at the same time, there's a bit of a controversy on whether or not they're actually subspecies or different species altogether. Either way, breeding for all of the subspecies is pretty much the same. They'll breed once every 2 months or so, and produce at most 6 to 4 clutches of 2 eggs per season. You can cohab a male and a female together in the same enclosure for around 4 weeks. After pairing up a male and female together, you'll be able to tell when the female is gravid. Since this species is so lean, such a large amount of fat in the stomach area, it's kind of hard to miss. I'd say gestation for this species is around a month or 2. Since this is an oviparous gecko, you're going to have to worry about egg incubation. There are many ways to approach this, none of which I'm familiar with. However, the general guidelines for incubating their eggs would be to keep them on a perlite or vermiculite substrate in a place that's consistently 73 degrees Fahrenheit, or 23 degrees Celsius. The eggs themselves will usually hatch after 75 to 80 days. Overall, really wouldn't recommend this species to be kept by non-advanced keepers. Due to how easy it is to stress out cat geckos. Nothing personal, of course, it's just that there's so little of them available as captive bred that if anyone who wasn't planning on attempting to breed the species went out and got one, then that could cause some damage to the native populations, mostly because of how commonplace exporting in Malaysia tends to be. But other than that, I think that's going to be it for this installment of Herp Corner. As always, sources will be in the description. If you're interested in this topic, I'd recommend looking further into their husbandry or history. If you like what I do and know a specific reptile or amphibian you'd like to see me cover, put it in the comments. If you learned something new with this one, feel free to subscribe. I do these every other week. Like the video to support the channel. Have a good evening, morning, or afternoon. Thank you for listening, watching, whatever, and I'll see you next time.